At 8:00 on January 24, 1945, near the frozen town of Holzwitzen, France, the world erupted. The ground shook as 6 monstrous German Tiger tanks, their 88mm cannons flashing, led a brutal charge of 600 elite SS mountain troops through the fog. Their target? The thinly held American line of the 3rd Battalion, 7th Infantry Regiment. Within minutes, the forward positions were transformed into a hellscape of geysering earth, shrapnel, and crimson snow. The battalion was being cut to pieces. In a shallow, ice-crusted ditch, 25-year-old Lieutenant Audie Murphy watched the collapse begin. He was shivering, not just from the cold, but from a severe fever and dysentery. Wounded and weighing barely 100 pounds, he wasn't even supposed to be on the front line. His job was intelligence, not infantry command. He gripped the field telephone in his hand, his direct line to the artillery batteries miles behind him. The order in his ear was clear: fall back, save yourself, report to the command post. He looked at his men, outnumbered and beginning to break under the storm of steel. Then he looked at the lead Tiger, a hulking symbol of invincibility, rolling closer. He made his choice. Murphy didn't retreat. In an act of unimaginable defiance, he did the opposite. He grabbed the spool of telephone wire, shouted for his men to take cover and fall back to the woods, and then he ran. He didn't run away. He sprinted alone directly into the onslaught, towards the advancing German behemoth and the waves of gray-clad infantry. Bullets snapped past him, kicking up dirt at his feet. His plan was suicide: to climb onto the burning hull of a nearby American tank destroyer, use its .5 caliber machine gun, and make a stand to buy time for his company to regroup. But as he ran, a new and far more dangerous idea formed in his mind. The telephone wire trailed behind him, still connected. He wasn't just running to a machine gun, he was running to the perfect observation point, placing himself directly in the path of the entire German assault. The artillery was his real weapon, and he was about to call down a storm right on top of himself.
To understand the man facing the German assault, you have to forget the image of a classic war hero. Audie Murphy wasn't a broad-shouldered giant. He was a slight 5'5" farm boy from Hunt County, Texas, whose childhood was etched in poverty and hardship. Born in 1925, he became the man of the house at age 12 after his father abandoned the family, leaving him to help his mother raise his 8 siblings. His education ended in the 5th grade, so he could pick cotton and hunt small game to put food on the table. He developed an otherworldly patience and a preternatural skill with a rifle, not for sport, but for survival. When his mother died in 1941, the family was split up, and the already quiet Murphy was left with a quiet, burning sense of responsibility and loss. In June 1942, desperate to serve after Pearl Harbor, he tried to enlist. The Marines and the Navy took one look at his underweight, boyish frame and rejected him. Only the Army accepted him, and even they labeled him as just another recruit, easy to overlook. They were wrong. The skills honed on the Texas farm, stalking, endurance, unflinching practicality, translated lethally onto the battlefield. After basic training, he was shipped to the 3rd Infantry Division, a unit that would see more continuous combat than almost any other in the European theater. His commanders initially saw a kid, assigning him to duties as a runner, but in the hills of Sicily and Italy, the invisible soldier began to emerge. He possessed a chilling, preternatural calm under fire. His marksmanship was exceptional, but his true weapon was his observational prowess, a hunter's eye for terrain and enemy movement. He earned a promotion to corporal not through bluster, but through silent competence. Yet the trauma of loss followed him to war. The news that his beloved younger sister had passed away back home during his deployment hardened something in him, deepening his isolation and his focus. By the time his division fought through the bloody Anzio beachhead and the push to Rome, Audie Murphy was no longer just a farm boy. He was a combat-hardened soldier with 2 Bronze Star medals for valor and a simmering, relentless drive that his peers couldn't quite explain. The Invisible Man was becoming a ghost on the battlefield, a predator waiting for his defining moment.
By January 1945, the relentless combat had taken a brutal toll on Audie Murphy. The boyish features from Texas were gone, replaced by the hollowed-out eyes and gaunt frame of a veteran who had seen too much. He was plagued by malaria, suffered from severe neuralgia, and carried the psychological wounds of losing countless friends. His body was a roadmap of the war. Sicily, Salerno, Anzio, southern France, the Vosges Mountains. Having already earned 2 Bronze Stars, 2 battlefield promotions, and a Purple Heart, he had more than fulfilled his duty. The army bureaucracy, in a rare moment of sense, agreed. He was pulled from the front lines, given a battlefield commission to second lieutenant, and assigned a safe rear echelon role as a liaison officer. His new orders were clear: stay at regimental headquarters, coordinate messages, and recover. His friends and commanders urged him to accept this gift of survival. The unspoken truth was that everyone, including Murphy himself, believed his luck had run out. To return to the front was a death sentence. But Murphy refused the order. It wasn't an act of open insubordination, but a quiet, deliberate sidestep. He couldn't accept safety while his platoon, now part of Company B, 15th Infantry Regiment, was digging into the frozen, vulnerable positions in the Colmar pocket. He convinced his superiors that his experience was needed with his men, not behind a desk. They lent it, likely seeing the stubborn fire in his eyes. Returning to the line, he didn't just resume command, he began a solitary, personal campaign of defiance against the looming German threat. While official patrols went out and came back with vague reports, Murphy, the former hunter, would slip into the dead of night or the gray dawn mist. Armed only with his rifle and a pair of binoculars, he would crawl for hundreds of yards into the skeletal, snow-choked forests of the Bois de Rewrote, deep into no man's land. He became a ghost, observing German patrol routes, artillery positions, and the ominous buildup of infantry. He reported precise coordinates and attack timelines to skeptical intelligence officers who dismissed the nervous lieutenant's fantasies. They were planning a routine relief in place. He was warning of an imminent, massive assault. On January 25th, the day before the attack that would make him a legend, his company commander, citing Murphy's exhausted state, ordered him to remain in a rear command post during the next day's action. It was a direct order for his own safety. Murphy listened, nodded, and silently prepared to disobey it once more.
The frozen silence of the Bois de Rewrote forest was more terrifying than the roar of battle. In the dead of night and the pale pre-dawn light of late January 1945, Lieutenant Audie Murphy became a phantom in this gray world. While his men tried to sleep in their icy holes, he would oil his .45 pistol, strap a handful of grenades to his belt, and vanish beyond the American wire. Dressed in a white snow cape over his uniform, he was a whisper against the endless white. His mission was self-appointed, to see what regiment's intelligence couldn't. He moved with the agonizing patience of the hunter he was, inching forward on his stomach, stopping for minutes at a time to listen to the crunch of a distant boot or the muffled cough of a German sentry. The cold seeped through his layers, biting at his old wounds and malaria-weakened body, but it was a tool. It masked his scent and kept the enemy huddled in their dugouts. He mapped machine gun nests disguised as woodpiles, noted the tread marks of armored vehicles under fresh snow, and counted the shadows of infantry moving into jump-off points. He was not just observing, He was piecing together the precise blueprint of the impending German attack. One such foray nearly became his last. While observing a suspected artillery coordination post, a German patrol of 5 soldiers, their breaths puffing in the frigid air, walked directly toward his shallow hiding place in a shell crater. Murphy froze, his face pressed into the snow, his fingers curled around his pistol under his body. The patrol leader stopped just 10 feet away, lighting a cigarette and grumbling about the cold. For a full minute, they stood almost on top of the American Army's most decorated soldier to be. Murphy later recalled the surreal clarity of the moment, the smell of the German tobacco, the intricate pattern of frost on the bark of a shattered tree beside him, the absolute certainty that a sneeze or a misplaced glance would mean his death. The patrol moved on, oblivious. He crawled back hours later, stiff and half-frozen, to deliver a hand-sketched map showing the exact flank of the planned German assault. His battalion commanders received the intelligence with skepticism, still viewing his solo missions as the reckless bravado of a tired young officer. They were planning a rotation, not a defense. But in the early morning hours of January 26th, as a thick, freezing fog clung to the ground, the first mortar shells began to fall exactly where the ghost had predicted. Murphy's unauthorized reconnaissance had just given him the only advantage he would have, knowing exactly where the storm would hit.
January 26th, 1945. The German assault exploded out of the fog with terrifying precision. Wave after wave of infantry, supported by machine guns and at least 6 heavy tanks, slammed into the right flank of Company B. The American line, stretched thin and frozen, began to crumble. Men were falling, and a chaotic retreat threatened to turn into a rout. From his forward position, Lieutenant Audie Murphy saw the disaster unfolding. He ordered his men to fall back to a prepared defensive line in the woods, but he knew a simple fighting withdrawal would be massacred in the open field. He needed to buy time. Spotting a nearby abandoned and burning M10 tank destroyer, its engine smoking and crew killed or wounded, he saw his only chance. With bullets kicking up snow at his heels, he sprinted through the hail of fire and clambered onto the red-hot hull. Exposed from the waist up, he manned the vehicle's .50 caliber machine gun, turning it on the advancing German infantry now only 50 yards away. His accurate, sweeping fire scythed through their ranks, momentarily staggering the attack and allowing his company to regroup. But he was a single, glaring target. The Germans quickly redirected their fury onto the lone figure on the armored hull. A German tank, likely a Panzer IV, rumbled forward, its main gun traversing directly toward him. Murphy's position was now untenable. As enemy machine gun and rifle fire pinged and sparked against the 10 destroyer's armor, he reached for the tank destroyer's radio to call for artillery support. It was dead, destroyed. The situation was hopeless. Then he remembered the field telephone. A wire still trailed from the vehicle, connected to the battalion's artillery network. With the German tank closing in, he grabbed the handset. He was now directing artillery not just near his position, but directly on it. He contacted the artillery battery, his voice eerily calm despite the chaos. He gave his coordinates and then issued the legendary order. Fire everything you've got right on my position. The enemy is right on top of me. Just fire the whole concentration. The artillery officer on the other end, knowing this was a virtual death sentence for the caller, hesitated, demanding confirmation. Murphy, watching the German infantry begin to envelop his isolated outpost, shouted back, "Shoot and hurry!" The first salvos screamed in, landing with earth-shattering concussions so close they rocked the tank destroyer. Shrapnel whistled through the air.
Murphy, still on the machine gun, now had to contend with fire from both sides. The American shells began to walk directly into the forming German assault, creating a curtain of steel and high explosives that separated the enemy from his retreating company. He remained at his post, bleeding from a leg wound and deafened by the roar, until his ammunition was nearly spent and the German advance had ground to a bloody halt against the wall of artillery he had summoned upon himself.
For over an hour, the battlefield near Holzwehr was transformed into a single roaring orchestra of annihilation, and Audie Murphy was its lone conductor. From his exposed perch on the M10, he directed the artillery with a chilling, surgical precision. Between bursts from the 50-caliber machine gun at the nearing infantry, he would grab the phone, his voice a steady monotone cutting through the din, calling out adjustments. Drop 50, fire for effect, or left 100, infantry in the tree line. American 105mm and 155mm shells walked back and forth across the snowfield, methodically chewing apart the German assault. Geysers of dirt, snow, and debris erupted in a lethal pattern. He wasn't just throwing up a wall of fire, he was hunting specific targets. He saw a German machine gun crew setting up in a farmhouse window and called a concentration that obliterated the entire corner of the building. He spotted an officer rallying a group of soldiers behind a hedgerow and directed a shell that erased the position. The psychological impact was as devastating as the physical one. The German advance, which had moments before been a confident, rolling wave, fractured into isolated, terrified groups of men, pinned down in shell holes, unable to move forward or back, under the gaze of the unmoving figure on the tank destroyer. But the German commanders were not fools. They identified Murphy as the singular source of their crumbling attack. The focus of their fury shifted from the American line to the one man holding it. Every weapon that could bear was turned on him. Sniper bullets snapped past his head, machine gun fire stitched across the M10's hull. The greatest threat came from the German tanks. A Panzer IV hiding in the tree line fired its main gun. The round screamed past, a near miss that shook the vehicle. Mortar rounds began to walk closer, their crump, crump, crump sending shrapnel pinging against the armor. Murphy, wounded in the leg and deafened, ignored it all. He continued firing, calling and adjusting. The symphony reached its crescendo when German artillery, finally zeroed in, began landing around his position. He was now in the crossfire of both armies. In a final, desperate act, the German infantry launched a direct charge at the M10, determined to silence him. Murphy swung the machine gun, firing until the last of the ammunition pelt was spent. As the Germans closed to within hand grenade range, the American artillery, responding to his last call, finally achieved the perfect bracket. A full battery salvo landed in a thunderous curtain of fire directly between him and the charging enemy, vaporizing the attack. When the smoke cleared, the field was silent but for the moans of the wounded and the crackle of burning vehicles. The German assault had been broken, and Company B's position was saved. Exhausted, bleeding, and surrounded by destruction, Murphy slowly climbed down from his post, his personal symphony complete. For over an hour, the battlefield near Holzwehr was transformed into a single roaring orchestra of annihilation, and Audie Murphy was its lone conductor. From his exposed perch on the M10, he directed the artillery with a chilling, surgical precision. Between bursts from the 50-caliber machine gun at the nearing infantry, he would grab the phone, his voice a steady monotone cutting through the din, calling out adjustments. Drop 50, fire for effect, or left 100, infantry in the tree line. American 105mm and 155mm shells walked back and forth across the snowfield, methodically chewing apart the German assault.
Geysers of dirt, snow, and debris erupted in a lethal pattern. He wasn't just throwing up a wall of fire, he was hunting specific targets. He saw a German machine gun crew setting up in a farmhouse window and called a concentration that obliterated the entire corner of the building. He spotted an officer rallying a group of soldiers behind a hedgerow and directed a shell that erased the position. The psychological impact was as devastating as the physical one. The German advance, which had moments before been a confident rolling wave, fractured into isolated, terrified groups of men, pinned down in shell holes, unable to move forward or back, under the gaze of the unmoving figure on the tank destroyer. But the German commanders were not fools. They identified Murphy as the singular source of their crumbling attack. The focus of their fury shifted from the American line to the one man holding it. Every weapon that could bear was turned on him. Sniper bullets snapped past his head, machine gun fire stitched across the M10's hull. The greatest threat came from the German tanks. A Panzer IV hiding in the tree line fired its main gun. The round screamed past, a near miss that shook the vehicle. Mortar rounds began to walk closer, their crump, crump, crump sending shrapnel pinging against the armor. Murphy, wounded in the leg and deafened, ignored it all. He continued firing, calling and adjusting. The symphony reached its crescendo when German artillery, finally zeroed in, began landing around his position. He was now in the crossfire of both armies. In a final, desperate act, the German infantry launched a direct charge at the M10, determined to silence him. Murphy swung the machine gun, firing until the last of the ammunition pelt was spent. As the Germans closed to within hand grenade range, the American artillery, responding to his last call, finally achieved the perfect bracket. A full battery salvo landed in a thunderous curtain of fire directly between him and the charging enemy, vaporizing the attack. When the smoke cleared, the field was silent but for the moans of the wounded and the crackle of burning vehicles. The German assault had been broken, and Company B's position was saved. Exhausted, bleeding, and surrounded by destruction, Murphy slowly climbed down from his post, his personal symphony complete.
The sudden silence was almost more deafening than the battle. As the smoke from the final cataclysmic artillery salvo began to drift across the shattered field of Holtzwihr, a grim stillness settled. Lieutenant Audie Murphy, his body screaming from wounds, exhaustion, and the searing cold of the metal hull, scanned the terrain. The German infantry assault had been pulverized, but the threat was not gone. Through the haze, he could see the ominous shapes of German tanks, Panzer IVs and the heavier Mark V Panthers pulling back into the tree line to regroup. They were wounded, but not defeated. His own company was now critically vulnerable, low on ammunition and relying entirely on the artillery he commanded. He lifted the field telephone handset to his ear to call in a preventative barrage on the enemy armor's positions. There was no dial tone, no crackle of static, just a dead, hollow silence. A cold dread, deeper than the winter chill, shot through him. The wire had been cut. A single lucky shell or fragment, perhaps from the very artillery he had called down, had severed the battalion's literal lifeline. He was now isolated, perched on a burning, immobilized vehicle, with a company to protect and no way to summon the firepower that had just saved them. Murphy's mind raced. To stay on the M10 was to become a stationary target for the German tanks, now undoubtedly re-sighting their guns on him. To abandon it was to lose the high ground and his last defensive position. But without communication, they were all dead men. He made a decision that defied every instinct of self-preservation. He had to reconnect the wire. Clambering down from the tank destroyer, he found the severed end of the telephone line snaking away from the vehicle. The break was not nearby.
He would have to follow it back toward the American lines, across the very killing ground he had just created, now littered with German dead and wounded, and under the direct observation of the enemy. Cradling his M1 carbine, he began to crawl, dragging the spool of wire with him, his eyes scanning for the other end. Bullets from distant German snipers began to strike the dirt around him, kicking up puffs of snow. He moved from shell hole to frozen corpse to shattered tree stump, a journey of agonizing inches. After what felt like an eternity, he found it, the other end of the wire, curled and blackened, lying in a frozen rut. As he fumbled with numb, blood-stained fingers to strip the insulation and twist the copper strands together, a German machine gun opened up from the tree line, stitching a line of fire toward his position. The connection was fragile, the repair crude. He shoved the twisted wires together and signaled back to the M10, where a soldier had taken his place. A test call. For a terrifying second, nothing. Then, a crackle. The line was live. Murphy, still exposed in the open, delivered the coordinates for the final decisive barrage that would shatter the German counterattack for good.